Hi, I'm Willem Wiggers. Together with our customers, we've developed a contract lifecycle management solution and a contract automation solution that covers the entire contract lifecycle end to end. In this walkthrough video, I'm going to highlight step by step how Weagree accelerates your contracting flow, making your life easier. From contract automation, the creation stage, and where I will also show you how the clause library is fully integrated with the contract creation process, but also supports your contract know-how management. Walk you through transaction management, where you can enjoy the benefits of document management system that is in Weagree. Contracts generate tasks, so I'll show you and tell you a little bit more about how Weagree makes your life easier and overseeable where contract tasks occur throughout the contract lifecycle. Weagree integrates with e-signing solutions such as DocuSign, and therefore I'll quickly show you how you can orchestrate and manage and monitor your e-signing process from within Weagree. Then one key and large functionality, of course, is Weagree CLM, where you can manage your contracts post-signing from where you receive notifications, and which is basically your whole repository for signed contracts and everything that relates to those signed contracts. And of course, as a head of legal or a general counsel, you may need to report on contracts. So at the last part of this video, I will show you the visualizations and the reporting options that are fully integrated, how they can work to your benefit. If you enter the Weagree wizard, you will arrive on this dashboard with widgets that you can organize to your liking. It looks maybe a little bit busy right here, but if you take a closer look, you will see that actually you have a lot of control. And don't forget, what we are demonstrating over here is contracts in action. It is your contracting practice as you find it over here. And you will see here's a widget that lists your contracts, the last 5 contracts that you've been created within Weagree. It has a widget with your contract tasks. There's a widget with contracts involving me. So in the draft stage of contracts, where I can immediately go to these contracts. If you have integrated Weagree with e-signing, for example, DocuSign, then there's a widget for, first of all, for monitoring the non-signed contracts, because you probably need to chase people to e-sign their contract before you can manage it. And once they are e-signed, they will arrive over here, and there's a widget which shows the e-signed contracts. They arrive fully automatically within Weagree, and from here you can transfer these individual contract once signed into the CLM for managing them. Then you have My Managed Contracts over here, indicating also that some urgency of tasks pop up. And if you need to have the contract related to a signed contract, then for the 5 last contracts or the 5 first to act contracts, as you see them over here, I can immediately open the Word document for the contract or enter the repository relating to such contract. There's also a functionality about projects, but that is going to be the topic of separate videos, so I'm not going to address that over here. Think of, for example, large transactions where you have framework agreements, or where you have an M&A transaction and need to manage a lot of related contracts in the framework of a single transaction. That's for a separate video. Each of these widgets are extremely actionable. From the widget, you can go straight to the corresponding view. The My Tasks view obviously brings you to the main navigation overview, where the complete overview is given for all of your tasks pending. Actually, the above navigation is designed in such a way that all the main tasks relating to contracts are accessible with one click from your dashboard. So not only from the widgets, but also in the main tabs you can go and work on your contracts. If you draft or negotiate a contract, the full overview of all pending negotiations contract is over here, and also the full list of all templates that you can create is to be found on the draft or negotiate overview. I'm not going to address approval workflows within this video, but if you are an approver, you would go to this overview page where all the contracts that are pending approval listed, and from where you can approve or reject the contract or discuss with other approvers and the submitter, contract owner of course, whether a contract can be or a transaction can be approved or not, and what your internal conditions for your approval are or why you are rejecting it. Now, that's the topic for a separate video. In this video, I will certainly address signed contracts, contract lifecycle management, or CLM as we call it, where you have your full repository with the notifications that you can configure and where you have all the insights that you need for specific contracts for managing your obligations and get insight in your obligations in relation to a certain signed contract. Here's also where you find the signed contracts of your colleagues. If you search a contract, as you may want to know which legal entity has entered into a contract with my counterparty here or there, or if you want to see which legal entity has signed which contracts, or if you want to search a certain type of contract or a certain contract, whether that's in place or not, you would do that, of course, on the search page. This is also where the main entrance to the entity management is. Entity management will also be the topic of a separate demo video. Last part of this walkthrough video, I'm going to show you about analysis and reporting on contracts. There's a very nice, highly visualized dashboard over there, again with widgets, where you can monitor your contracts and from where you can create all sorts of reports relating to your contracts. Now, before we enter into creating a contract, I will show you one final thing, which is the dashboard here is filled with widgets that you would like to monitor or that you would like to have on your dashboard, but there are more widgets. You may want to see, for example, the contracts that are pending my approval. If I click on the plus sign or I simply drag it onto the page, it will create the overview. For me, nothing is pending approval. I also don't see the need to have a widget for that on my dashboard, so I've taken it out. Then the tasks that are high priority, the ones that I need to give follow-up to in a very short notice, for that is also a separate widget. And then here you will see some more widgets which relate to reporting and analysis. And underneath this, furthermore, are widgets relating to specific personalized contexts. So, for example, which general purchasing agreements have been outstanding for more than 2 months and need to have my follow-up because they need to be e-signed, or maybe someone has not e-signed anything yet. From the widgets, you can also create a report just like that. And you can tailor or customize the scope of what you see in a widget easily. I'm going to keep it simple. How you create these personal widgets, I will show you that later on in this video. I will now create an NDA and show you how contract automation works, where you can invite guests, where the clause library works, and how contract creation can be accelerated. Weagree also supports and helps managing contracts that were created outside Weagree. And of course, if you receive the version 2, 3 or 4, or if your colleagues send you schedules or contract related files, you can forward email those to Weagree. As you could already see in the top right corner, there's an inbox. If you send an email with an attachment to your Weagree portal, Weagree will automatically forward and send that email in your inbox from where you can handle it. Later on, we will see how it works. For now, all I do is that I forward an example of those email. So here you have an email and I forward it to the Weagree portal. Later on, we will pick up that email and handle it. Let's create the NDA and see how contract automation within Weagree works. This is the heart of contract creation. What you see on the left-hand side is an outline of a confidentiality agreement, starting with the parties block, interpretation clauses with definitions and other clauses, at the end signature block and a dispute resolution complete version. That's a funny indication, complete. Why is that? Well, actually, we use in the confidentiality agreements template, we use building blocks taken from the clause library. In the clause library, you probably also have variations on dispute resolution clauses, like a dispute resolution clause simple or some other version. Using them from the clause library makes your life for contract know-how management purposes extremely simple. Because if you want to update the templates for changes in the laws or regulations, or for a change of your corporate policy in the way you want to handle applicable law or dispute resolution, then you would only make the change in the clause library clause, and from there it will automatically apply in the templates where those building blocks from the clause library are being used. What you also see over here is an indication which clauses in the outline of the confidentiality agreement still require an answer, and of course also those clauses that are fully automatically inserted without any Q&A questions to be asked. On the right hand side are Q&A questions. Within Weagree, typically it starts with what we call global questions. Those are the questions that affect the entire template. They may relate to the background for general purchasing agreements, what type of products or services are being sourced under a strategic sourcing agreement. In a share purchase agreement, it may relate to payment mechanisms or closing mechanisms, or whether certain conditions apply that affect the wording all across the contract that you're creating. In an NDA, it's not that complicated, but NDAs tend to be there in the format of a mutual or a one-sided NDA where we are to disclose. And occasionally you need to draft an NDA where the other party is typically the disclosing party. Clicking on the magnifier allows you to see in the underwater screen what the effect is of answering this question in one way or another. You can expand the underwater screen so that you can see it a little bit better. This gives you a very strong sense of being in control over the language of your contract without the need to put all the nuance in the Q&A questions. It makes you feel comfortable not being in a pipeline for a long Q&A time, but have full control of what language is being inserted. Weagree can be linked with an external CRM so that you can pick up the party details from outside. In our case, we are going to enter into an agreement with the party that we are already working with, for example, Gavia Services Paris SA, and it inserts all the details relating to that party. We're going to go for product development being the main purpose. In such a case, we might have an invention, for example, that we have been patenting, and where we need to, in order to discuss all this for which we have a patent, we would need to make disclosures relating to that. Normally, that would mean that we enter into a patent license, but for the scope of these simple discussions, that's probably an overkill. At the same time, when you set up your template for a confidentiality agreement, you don't anticipate the rare occasion that you want to provide for a patent license in a confidentiality agreement. That's quite rare. Similar use cases can be found elsewhere. For example, you could have a joint development agreement where you want to insert certain clauses with organizing the joint development project more than you anticipated in the template. Where you could have a share purchase agreement, for example, so for the purchasing of shares, and you would not anticipate the purchase of certain separate assets under the share purchase agreement, for example, real property or real estate, or the acquisition of the intellectual property rights alongside the shares, but you want to integrate those in your share purchase agreement. And yet, in your share purchase agreement template, you don't anticipate all those type of assets because it's a share purchase agreement. Now, likewise, it may be helpful from time to time, typically the situations where legal counsel are asked to be involved, that you want to plug in certain clauses from the clause library. And that is needed over here. On the top left side, you can see access to the clause library where you can find that final puzzle piece and plug it into the outline. You can see here also, for example, the dispute resolution clause complete, and indeed there is a version simple here as well. But we are searching for a patent clause, so that is something that relates in the category intellectual property rights category of clause. The clause library opens in the language of the underlying template. So you won't see the French language clauses or the Dutch language clauses as they may also be in the clause library, because a Dutch language clause in an English language template doesn't make much sense. I'm going to search the clause library. You can see also that there are other ways of filtering and sorting your clause library so as to optimize usage. And in our case here I see a clause IP license out, and that's what I would need in connection with a patent license. Indeed, an explanatory note tells me that it is suitable for all kind of IP rights. I'm plugging in this clause and I want to insert it into the confidentiality agreement under the generic NDA clause on intellectual property rights. So I'll insert it over here, and when or as we are going through the questionnaire now, we will also process the Q&A questions that pop up in this clause. After answering all the Q&A questions, you will know only then which definitions are to be inserted. So at the end of the questionnaire, Q&A questions popping up in the definitions will then be triggered. And you can see already that there's a license definition included. I can tell you that definition, it's listed in alphabetical order over here, triggered and inserted by virtue of this license out clause. Of course, later on we will see that additional definitions will appear as we go through the questionnaire. Now, let's start. It's not a confidentiality as such agreement anymore, but confidentiality and license agreement. And you can see in the underwater screen what the effect of my answering the questionnaire is. It gives you full control over the whole process, and that's a very convenient feeling if you are in a pipeline for a questionnaire type of things. Questions, as you might have noticed, can be really straightforward. Do you want to name the employees with access to information in an annex? If the question is still unclear, there are information icons that explain it probably for the more junior people. If I tick yes, it will insert a phrase into a clause 3.2 referring to an annex. And then we will see that fully automatically, as a consequence of me checking the box over here, it has added an annex to the contract, and it will in the end of course process the Q&A questions that pop up in that schedule. We will then see that when we are going to list the patents in an annex, that this numbering may change, and we will see eventually how it works in the Word document as it will come up. Q&A questions appear only as and when necessary. So if I check a box, it will start asking follow-up questions and whatever is needed or related to that. Here's the Q&A question that relates to my patent clause. There's still no choice made as regard to geographical scope. So in the absence of a Q&A answer, it will insert certain language within square brackets. As I check territory, it will insert a definition. We were talking about certain patents to apply over here, so the license would be under license patent. And now you grasp what is happening in the list of definitions. And in alphabetical order, you see appearing license patents as well as territory. There's really no care to be taken ultimately in the Word document whether definitions are there or not. Definitions appear only as and when they are used, depending on how you had answered the questionnaire. You won't have unused definitions in the list. And you should also not have definitions failing to be listed, as you may use them in the template. And then again, Q&A questions can be very short swing. And that's very helpful for non-lawyers. Lawyers would like to seek the nuance in all respects regarding the effect of answering the questionnaire. But a salesperson would simply want to answer the question, and they don't consider whether have you already started making disclosures in the past. That requires a warranty relating to the past to be included. And as the question is short, it gives me a strong sense of being in control over the creation of my Word document, that I can see it in the underwater screen. And there's another thing that I would like to show you over here. Actually, two things. First of all, the underwater screen gives you a very powerful sense of being in control over your contract. But it goes beyond this. You can detach the underwater screen and have it scroll along on a monitor. And it looks quite awkward on a single monitor, but you would then have your Word document scroll along with you answering the questions. And you can see on one screen the contract that scrolls along with answering the questionnaire, and on your laptop you can answer the questions. What also is possible over here is that you click in the text and you modify it just like that. I can tweak the language, and I'm going to do this now by way of an instruction or by way of opening a discussion about the percentage needed in the definition of affiliates. You will get the picture that ultimately the Word document will be looking the way it is right now with all my changes. A very nice feature over here is another one that you might have noticed already. Alongside every clause in this contract that we are currently creating are little balloons. And the balloons enable me to discuss certain clauses with colleagues. With, for example, the legal department, I would send Gerry Kneteman an email. If I send it over here, Gerry Kneteman will receive an email with a link. He can click on the link, comes straight into the questionnaire, and would see in the communications tab here in the margin, clicking also on the underwater screen, where it is in the clause, and he can reply to my question to him and answer whether that's a relevant or irrelevant thing to consider in the framework of a confidentiality agreement. You can send a message to the template administrator instead of putting a post-it on your desk or on your monitor, just to make sure that you don't forget the changes you want to make in your contract know-how. You would do that by sending the message to the template administrator, indicated that you saw a typo or that there's a change in laws or regulations or whatever you may want to forward to the template administrator. So the collaborative aspect in creating a contract within Weagree is very strong, and it also is very actionable, because you don't need to make a set up a meeting or so or discuss it in anything. You can simply invite the person over here and you can go on. One thing that you don't want people in the business to do is make a selection of the applicable law. And it's not necessary. You can filter out Q&A questions based on authorization level, based on user profiles or roles predefined within Weagree. I am processing this as a head of legal, but if I were contract manager, I would not have received questions about dispute resolution. If I'm a more junior lawyer, I might make such a choice on the applicable law, but I might not necessarily be given the option to select whether a court or arbitration are the right means of settling disputes. This filtering away is also something that you can apply to guest users that you invite within the Weagree wizard. You just click on the button, fill in the details of your supplier, customer, a partner, and you leave them a personal note. They will receive an email just like the comment or question to Gerry Kneteman a minute ago, and they will receive a link where they are invited to create a password, super secure, and they would enter into Weagree only into this questionnaire to fill in those details that relate to them. Of course, you can build up the questionnaire more elaborately for guest user purposes. We are now only in the rather narrow framework of an NDA, but for large framework agreements or statements of works or the like, it may be very helpful if you have your partners, suppliers or customers to join you in the questionnaire. Guest users can be granted less rights. Also, they would not see each and every option for limitation of liability clauses. They're out of their sight. They will get the default answer. We have the licensed patents over here. I might define the patent over here with its patent number, but I may as well attach the list with patents in an annex. And if I do so, yes, you will appreciate that at the end of the document, it will automatically insert a schedule or annex, and the annex is referenced correctly. And then we are at the end of the questionnaire. I can click through the outline here on the left to reconsider Q&A questions, but I may as well generate the Word document. And then Weagree delivers your Word document on the draft or negotiate page. Before I'm going to explain to you how from here Weagree can save you a lot of time, hassle, and how Weagree helps you organize your contracts and contract related files, let's first take a look at the contract that we've just generated. The most important files are always one click away, and in our case, the confidentiality agreement. In Weagree, you can configure basically everything in your contract house style, and you don't need to take care of applying the house style to all your contracts, because Weagree treats house styles and look and feel of your contracts, letters and other documentation in a modular way, which basically means that you typically define 2 or 3 house styles in Weagree and that you apply them to all the agreements, which also means that if you change the house style, you would do that on one place only, and for the rest, all of your templates are updated at once. You can define virtually everything. Let's walk through the document that we've generated and I'll explain you how and where that is. First of all, it's the layout of the cover pages. You can configure this entirely to your liking, indicate where draft indications or for discussion purposes notices need to appear. You can define what needs to be in the header and in the footer of a cover page, the table of contents page and further pages, etc. And let's then walk through the contract step by step. Note that the table of contents already indicates the license clause as we had just inserted it. Then in the subsequent pages, also here fully automatically the title of the contract is adjusted according to the Q&A, of course. Party details have been inserted as they were defined in the CRM or in the party database of Weagree. You may note that I made this tweak in the affiliate definition as it were there all the time, but I inserted it, of course, during the questionnaire. Then the remaining definitions are all in alphabetical order. Note the ones about territory, license patents, and license. And Annex 1 is what has become the license patents list. Obviously, then the reference to employees with access to confidential information is renumbered. Annex 2, and this is something which is worthwhile noting, that cross-references within Weagree cannot go wrong. They will always appear correctly, and that is what you can see already here with the references to the Annexes 1 and 2. Then also in the header and the footer of the agreement, they are to the liking formatted according to your house style, of course. And then let's move on to the next pages where you will see that we, through the clause library, inserted a license clause referring to the license patent, which basically pushed back clauses disclaimer and temporal scope to become articles 7 and 8. And then another interesting thing appears, because in 8.2 there's a cross-reference made to clause 8.1. Well, 8.1, that didn't used to be 8.1 until we inserted the license clause, but the 8.1, which is here, is correctly renumbered. Further, you can see that the party details for the notices clauses have been inserted also fully automatically, taken from the CRM system. Signature block are ready to go. What you don't see actually, but it is here in white spacing inserted, are the presets for e-signing. No need to take care of that. When we later on are going to proceed the e-signing, then placeholders are already put in place. Annex 1 contained the license patents. You might note that during the questionnaire I selected the license patents by their short name, but Weagree also fully automatically added the more technical details. It didn't trigger that during the questionnaire. And then finally there's the Annex 2. That's the Word document that we want to work with, of course. Weagree is not limited to contract creation only. It supports you end to end from start to finish. And that's quite powerful. You want to bridge the negotiation stage because if you answer a questionnaire, you're collecting quite a number of data that you want to use later on for managing your contracts. And it's not limited to start date, end date, whether the contracts are assignable or whether there's a change of control clause in an agreement. But in a more mature implementation of contract lifecycle management, you would also want to be able to manage your contracts on other data. And those are typically the ones that are result of the questionnaire that you've been answering. Then you don't want to exit Weagree after creating your first stage. And that's not necessary. Weagree supports you throughout the entire pre-contractual stage of versioning and negotiations, collecting your files. It's your central desktop where all your contracting work comes together. It means that you have to be able also to upload contracts that have not been automated, that have not been created through answering a questionnaire. And that's actually what Weagree does. I'm going to show you how that works, and I'm going to also show you the power of the transaction management stage as Weagree supports it. Especially if you set up an integration with SharePoint, then the documents would be stored on the relevant SharePoint sites that you have in the folders that you want to keep them in. But Weagree will still remain your central starting point, and you don't need to have all those clicks through SharePoint sites and SharePoint folders, as it is all centralized within Weagree. And that's quite powerful. I'm going to show you how it works and why this is a cost and time saver in your contracting work. First of all, you see the tab here in the margin, or you click the button Contract, Create Contract, and here is where lots of contract can start. Of course, we saw it already on the dashboard that the 5 most frequently used templates are collected on the dashboard in the widget. You may remember that from the very beginning of this demo, but here's your complete set of all the templates, all the automated templates, but you also see that there are Word documents over here. You can bring your model contracts into Weagree and list them alongside the automated templates. And you can see the difference between an automated contract and a Word document. And if you have this integration with SharePoint set up, then basically it stores that document in the right folder once you open it. And from there you can manage the transaction still from within Weagree, and it would behave just like any other contract. In some 75% of the cases, you would receive the first draft contract from the counterparty. And of course, here is your starting point for importing the document into Weagree. Importing the external document into Weagree. You can import it, drag and drop it manually, and there's also, as we saw that previously, and you may have noticed in the top right corner, there's also the possibility that you forward that email to the Weagree portal, to your Weagree portal, and Weagree will deliver that email here in your inbox, and you will pick it from there to create a new contract entry. It would be similar to importing your first draft over here. It's not part of this demo video, but it's worth mentioning as it is over here. Start a project. If you want to create a transaction where several templates relate to each other, think of a statement of work, master framework agreement, or a set of agreements that relate to each other, to one single project or transaction, then you can start a project and you would drag the created contract entries into that project and you would manage it from there. I'm not going to show you that, it's for a separate video. If you receive the first draft agreement from the counterparty, you will likely want to use certain clauses, at least from your own clause library. Click on clause library, it will open the clause library and it will allow you to select the clauses, and then it creates a Word document with that single clause only for you to copy paste in the markup that you want to send back. We are automating also that process and we're making it more convenient. But of course, this is the old-fashioned way, using your clause library that is accessible from here. If you did not make them accessible over here, you might have an intranet site where you have your Word templates available. That could be a SharePoint site, of course, and you might simply want to point the users to that site. By default, it is set to the model contracts platform where Weagree shares its model contracts, but you may well reconfigure this so as to point at your own intranet site with your Word documents over there. The visibility of these buttons can be tweaked so that people in the business don't have straight access to a clause library or to the model contracts that you want to reserve for in-house legal counsel. Same for starting a project. I already mentioned it. Weagree is enterprise grade, which means that you can organize your templates, you can organize accessibility of legal entities, the entity management, but also the visibility of contracts on the basis of user groups. And those user groups could be anyone: IP and R&D department, procurement department. We have already created a contract, so I'm not going to step into that, but let's now assess the capabilities of your transaction management that you have here on the page generally. Let me start by explaining the main buttons that you see on the top. I already explained one, but there's also the possibility to invite a guest user into a single contract entry. In creating a services agreement for online campaigns, I might want to invite a third person, a supplier, a customer, or an internal user, invite that user to also answer certain Q&A questions in connection with this transaction. That might be a very powerful one. It opens a pop-up. It asks me to enter a password or to identify my colleague, and it then fully operates securely, of course. All they find on their homepage is this single contract entry for which you invited them, and they will not be able to create anything else or see more than this contract entry only. Quite a helpful thing for collaborative contracting in an event. In connection with contracts, I already told you that we have a task Kanban where you can manage your task. More about that later on. But it also means that you can just simply assign a task in connection with a contract, not specifically with a Q&A question or a specific clause or so, but simply a task to one of your colleagues. Once a transaction is done, we would do the e-signing. I'll show you later on. Manage basically means the contract is signed and you want to manage it in the CLM, and it would start from here. On this page, you would have a shortcut access to the entity management and to the CRM, which may be integrated, especially the CRM with party details or integrated, but still you would have access from over here. Then there are a few buttons that are quite remarkable on this page, and they are actually my personal search filters. I have created shortcut filters that if I click on GPAs outstanding for more than 2 months, it gives me in one click an overview of the general purchasing agreements that have been under the radar for too long. Same for loan agreements. I created a filter. If I click on it, I can immediately see draft loan agreements that have not been signed yet. And I did the same for NDAs. I can prevent this way that my colleagues start doing business without a contract being in place, simply because the contract is still pending on the overview page over here. I also have the possibility to check my colleagues, how they are doing, or jump into their business. If a colleague is ill, I might check if Bernard is busy, how many contracts he has under his hands, Lance Armstrong, Kneteman. I have them all in one overview. I can also check how many general purchasing agreements are under their responsibility or under my colleague's responsibility and step into that as well. Let's go back to my own overview where I'll show you that there are more advanced options. You might have noticed on the overview page that certain contract entries are marked magenta. It indicates that the Word document as we are currently negotiating it or as has been sent out is outdated as opposed to the template that we currently use for creating new contracts. And in the case of the NDA, it's not that urgent. But for certain contracts, it may well be important that you want to stick to the latest version, and at least you want to be able to see what the changes are. Now, if you want to update this contract for the latest changes in the template, then basically you would select it, you would update it, and it will link it to the newer version of the template. If you have a set of contract entries that basically relate to one single transaction, more or less a project, then you select them and you can convert them into a project and handle them as a project. Invite colleagues into the project and work together on a project basis rather than have them as single contract entries over here. If you would like to discuss your Q&A answers to the questionnaire with a colleague, then you can export the answers given in the questionnaire and have it as a separate file. If you are, for example, tendering a transaction and you would like to create exactly the same copy of your Q&A answers for another competing supplier in the tender, then you would copy your Q&A. It uses the same answers and you would only change the name details of the counterparty, and you would have two exactly the same first draft contracts that you create. You can export a report and you can of course reassign contracts to other colleagues. For example, if you find that a colleague of yours is particularly busy, for example, Marianne Fox may be too busy, and we discussed, and if I take the overview of her contracts, then indeed reassign these contracts to another colleague, which could be Bernard. And then if you look at the Bernard's overview, you will see that Bernard has been assigned to much of Marianne's work. That would be very helpful to balance the workload across the team. That for the more advanced options. You quickly saw the search options, which are quite powerful. These are also separate on the search page available. I'm not going to dig into the details of the entity management, but it makes sense that I give you a quick peek over here because entity management is fully integrated with the entire contract creation and the entire CLM. From this overview page, if you click on entity management, you have one overview on to the legal entities that you are entitled to see. Also, this is managed on the basis of user groups that you are a member of, so that is role-based or user profile defined. You can see here Weagree BV and all our affiliated companies across the world, where you can also see what is the address and how many contracts have been entered into by Weagree, for example. If I click on the description, I can see the basic details of the legal entity, so a registration number and party details like where it is established, and then I would go to the entity details in the entity management from here, where I can see who are the shareholder subsidiaries, who are the managing directors and any representatives, constitutional documents, etc., etc. I'm not going to do that, but this is just for you to have an impression of how the entity management fully integrates into Weagree. And then one final concern, of course, the visibility of these data can be managed in the user management. So it's not, if you delegate contract creation to the business, that people in the business will have full access to everything. No, they can only pick and see those details or those legal entities as are presented to them and edit those details that you allow them to edit. There's much time saving in the management of files, and although it may not feel like something that costs you a lot of time, it is at least very convenient how Weagree supports you in this and how Weagree accelerates a whole lot of small steps in this process. Let's take a closer look at how the repository works by opening a contract entry. And what you see over here are basically all the files that relate to this particular contract entry. It includes separated schedules or annexes, transaction-related documentation, and whatever you may need to collect in connection with a contract entry. It's all up to you. There's an information icon where a short explanatory note can be added, whatever you want to add. It may relate to the status of that particular file. If you want to upload a new version of the document, for example, as it was sent by you by the counterparty, let's just drag and drop, and Weagree then proposes it in the file name, of course, as it had in the attachment or in the folder from where you upload it. And Weagree allows you to change the file name just like that. Typically, of course, the file name is one that the other party has determined, and you want to maintain your own file name, so to have certain order in your filings and in your repository. You can add a note to the particular file, indicate the file nature, and you may configure the visibility of this particular file for all your colleagues, or more specifically for guest users. You don't necessarily want everyone to see all the contract files, and that's what you manage by indicating the visibility. In the overview, that will still remain visible because there's a shield that shows up next to the file, indicating that not everyone is able to see that file like you can. Creating a compare between two versions is also very convenient. Of course, you can integrate Weagree with your own redlining software, but most of the customers won't have that available. But still, in that case, Weagree enables you to create a compare to make sure that the version that you are uploading, even with track changes, does show the changes that you want to see and not has some additional hidden changes that were not entered in the track changes by the counterparty. Weagree suggests to you what the original version and the modified version is. You have the possibility to tweak the name of the file of the compare document that's being created, and you may indicate, of course, that the file needs to be added to the repository. As the transaction proceeds, it may not be necessary to keep all the files inside. You may want to archive them for later on. You don't necessarily want to delete them at once. Probably at a later stage you want to have them in your archive, just in case you will have you encounter some disputes. And also archiving files is a thing that you can do with only one click. And if you want to retrieve it from the archive, also retrieving is something with one click away. One way to add new files to your contract entry is to drag and drop. I just show you. But there's also another possibility, which is if you receive a first draft contract or a version 2 or 3 or contract related files by email, you can forward that email to the Weagree portal. And Weagree will automatically deliver it in your inbox. And that's what happened over here. In the top right corner, you can see that there's my inbox with 3 files forwarded to it. And the one is relating to a contract called Misaka. Here's the email text, and 2 ways to deal with the email. The one is it's the first draft that I received from a third party, or it is a new version or new contract entry related files that I would like to append to an existing contract entry. Now, the latter is the case, so I append it to a contract entry. That is in this case Misaka Tech Support KK, and if I indicate that that's the file, I can also indicate whether I want to have the email text added to the communications in connection with this contract entry, so that I maintain and I still have in my repository the communications with the counterparty that I just forwarded. Then in connection with the file, of course, I can change the file name. Then this is version 5, final comments after our meeting. The file is a draft contract version. It should be visible to everyone in this. Going to save it as is. I might upload some additional files if I had my own notes, for example. I could do that over here. If there were more attachments to the email that I don't want to have in my contract repository, I can remove those. I can indicate that this file needs to be analyzed by the AI-driven automated contract review tooling within Weagree. That might be useful, but for the time being, I'm not going to do that. And all I do then is I save the file. It brings me straight into the repository of this particular contract. Weagree fully automatically stores the contract alongside the other files of this particular contract, as you can see it over here. This is at the same time the contract for managing contracts, CLM. I'll come back to that later on in the process. For now, I just want to check a few things as regards the draft that was sent to me. I would want to make a compare against version 4, adds it to the list where I can check whether indeed this is what I would want to see. I think it's quite okay, so let's store these in the archive. I'll take them out of the first view. These are the contracts that are relevant for the transaction as it is right now. And we can pursue to the e-signing. But before doing that, let me quickly highlight what you see over here. This is already the contract sheet with details for contract lifecycle management, as I said. So some aspects had already been filled in after version 2 was being discussed between the parties. So the business aspects have been implemented already. This is the repository. I might also indicate here that I would want to make a reference to an external repository or to an external site that we have built in connection with this contract. I can add that over here, and if I do so, it will create a button. An icon has been added. If I click on this, it opens a separate tab and it brings me to the site of this contract. That's a convenient thing if you use Weagree as your starting point or your workbench for all the contract related work. If I then click next, I can see who else is involved in this transaction. That's for the time being only me. I would have the guests listed over here. I could also add the users who are comments or requests for support from the legal department, for example. I'm now going to the overview page because I think it's time to e-sign the agreement. I select the contract, that's this one. For e-signing, I already also had promised another colleague that we would sign an NDA. So let's do that as in one action right now. E-sign, click the e-sign button. It selects the 2 transactions as we have them over here. I can indicate for each of the documents which ones need to be e-signed, whether the e-signing need to be processed with parallel e-signing. If one of the parties needs to go first, then I can choose for another one and I can change the order of e-signing. For here, that's not relevant. If there are more parties to the agreement, I can customize the sequence so as to make sure that the right persons come first. Sometimes you have the CEO who wants to go as the very last of everyone, and in those cases you might want to have a customized sequence, and this will be processed through, in this case, DocuSign or another e-signing provider, but Weagree will nurture or feed the e-signing process. As regards Weagree, we do know who the e-signers are. I can select them from the list. If there is only one e-signatory in the list, then of course that one had been pre-selected. In our case, that's not the case. I select Fausto Coppi, our CEO, to do the e-signing. I would need to fill in the details of the service provider over here. After having selected them, and I need to zoom out here to show you how it works, I can add a personal message, go to the next stage where I would select for signing the NDA, the parties, enter the details, add a personal message. Then next, finally, I can process each of the selected items. I might decide to postpone the e-signing of the confidentiality agreement in this case and kick off the e-signing, which will then run automatically outside Weagree. Receipts for the e-signing, whether one of the e-signatories has actually opened their e-signing invitation or have downloaded the Word document, etc. That will be fully automatically processed by Weagree. You will be able to see that alongside the contract that it relates to. Of course, when the document is e-signed or when the files have all been e-signed by the counterparty or by both parties, then it will be automatically returned to Weagree into the Weagree wizard, and it will automatically, there's no need for anyone to take manual action over here. It will automatically land alongside the contract, and the contract will be marked e-signed. And then we're back at the Weagree workspace, your transaction management, where all your draft and negotiated contracts reside. You can now follow the e-signing, and once the e-signed contract returns e-signed, the little e will turn green. And like this, there are many tasks in your contracts that are in the overview over here, but you don't see how that works. And that's what we've solved by introducing a fully integrated task Kanban, where all the tasks that are triggered by any of the agreements, including the entity management, if you have that implemented, are put on the Kanban over here. We have tweaked the Kanban slightly as opposed to how the traditional Scrum Kanban works for software developers, in that we think that a backlog could be something useful, of course, but we also believe that there are, for legal counsel, those tasks that are beyond the next 2 or 3 weeks, rather to be done in a few months' time, but they should not be in a backlog alongside hundreds of thousands of other tasks in the backlog. So we have distinguished unscheduled on-hold tasks from the backlog. Also, a legal counsel's scope of work is not necessarily one of a week or so, but typically scheduled over the next 2 or 3 weeks. So we've also distinguished between tasks that are in progress. They need to be solved sort of in the next 2 or 3 weeks, as opposed to those tasks that are more urgent or require attention right now. And that's what we have brought together under the Do Now overview, which are basically the tasks due for this week. There's not much configuration needed in setting up the task Kanban. Basically, Weagree knows from many stages of a contract when a task is triggered. Because think of it yourself. If you start a questionnaire, then until you generate the Word document, you would need to finish it. So there's fully automatically a task to finish the questionnaire. Weagree knows that if you finish the questionnaire, then you would generate a Word document. So if you generate your first draft contract, the task to finish your questionnaire is fully automatically completed. Plus, as you finish a questionnaire, your next step would be that you send out, presumably, the first draft contract to the counterparty or to your colleagues internally, and that there will be a task to give follow-up on your first draft within, say, a few weeks from now. So this mechanism is quite advanced in how it works. It requires really hardly any configuration or setup or implementation efforts, and it follows the standard patterns of contracts. And you can see those automated tasks with this little thunderbolt sign that indicates that this is an automated task that is automatically triggered, but also automatically completed. You may as well have tasks that you create yourself. You've already seen this probably in connection with the contract properties or in the Q&A, in the questionnaire of creating a contract, but you can also create a task over here and tweak it to your liking. A task can be assigned to a colleague of yours. It may be a recurring task, and in that case you can indicate how many times it should recur. You can indicate the frequency of recurrence, the due date, give it a status and a priority, and it will run over the Kanban board just like that. For now, let's take one example. Here's a check of the registrations in the UK and France for legal entities. And let's assume that this task is finished and I drag it to the completed part. If there's a little thing that I need to give a follow-up on because I received something and I need to do something myself, then it will reside over here until I archive the completed tasks. Like all across the Weagree wizard, you can always step in for your colleagues who happen to be sick one day or who happen to work part-time, and you would find that here in the sub-tab, My Colleagues. Then the overview is somewhat different. It's more a table overview, and that's of course because if you have all your colleagues in the overview, the task Kanban is not useful probably for having the right overview. Yet you can change the styling of the overview and create a Kanban out of this just like you could have done that for your own Kanban if you had preferred to do so. I go back to the Weagree workspace, your Weagree DMS, where I'm going to pick up a contract and transfer it into the CLM. It's time to show you Weagree CLM, Contract Lifecycle Management, for the stage post-signing. I'll select the contract and I'll sign one that is not yet fully e-signed, but there's no big problem in that because Weagree doesn't care about the place where your contract is pre-signing or post-signing for receiving the e-signing notices back from DocuSign. And also the task relating to follow up on the e-signing and awaiting the e-signatories to sign, as well as the widget on the dashboard showing which contracts are still pending e-signing, remain there. So I'll manage the agreement, select the contract entries that need to be moved to the CLM and click Manage. First thing you need to do is to clean up your DMS, the history of versions and files that you collected during the negotiations. And of course, if there will be a dispute in the future, you might need the versions that you've exchanged or received from the other party, but you don't necessarily want to keep all the documents in your files because it clutters your overviews, and it's not necessary, for example, to keep compares between documents, because if at later stage you want to create a compare, you can still do that. So what Weagree does is it proposes to you a setup that aligns with what it expects and how your contract will survive post-signing in the CLM. It will propose the last draft version or a final or pre-final version to be directly accessible. If the e-signed PDF is there, then of course also that one will be directly accessible from overviews. And it will do the same with, for example, documents with schedules or documents related to the transaction. The draft versions are proposed to be archived, so they will still remain available, except that they are not directly accessible. You need to open your archive, you've seen that, and there are those files that you might want to delete. I can make my own assessment over here, and for example, I don't necessarily find the version 1 relevant because I understand precisely how our own systems were set up, and I don't necessarily want to keep version 3 as that was not a big one in terms of negotiated terms. And then I've cleaned up the overview a little bit. I can put a note to myself and complete the details, for example, a different priority status after the signing. And then I click Manage, and Weagree will automatically bring it into the CLM. It will notice that the e-signed file or that the signed file is not yet there, so it prompts me to upload it. If it's not a relevant thing for our purposes, then as the e-signing is pending, I would not remind myself and close it. And then we are in the CLM with the overview of details of this particular signed contract. Let's walk you through it. First of all, on the right hand side, you see those key details of the agreement, the party details, signing dates not yet known, the title of the agreement, some background information as it will show up in the overview, and then some more relevant details related to the contract status and the contract number. One remark over here: it is possible to enter your own contract number, but it is also possible that Weagree generates contract numbers fully automatically. That's for a separate video. It's quite a powerful feature because you can indicate at what stage contracts will be assigned a number, and you can also pre-format the contract numbering style in what elements needs to be included in the contract number. Quite a powerful feature. You can indicate the urgency of the agreement and the contract owner. You can reassign it. You can indicate who or which department of the company, of the organization, is the user group that will work with this contract. Also, you can indicate which contract sheet, so the set of metadata on which you want this contract to be managed. And of course, there's your note to self. Then there is a data retention period applicable in the case of expired contracts for automatically deleting your contract data. And if that's not the default period that you want to apply to these contracts, you can override it by defining it yourself. On the left-hand side, you see the parties to the agreement as they were already listed over here. And if you walk through it, you will be able to check those details. You can see in the repository as we had created it, but of course you can also show the archived files as I wanted them to be kept. I already indicated to you that a contract entry may have its own website. I had defined it over here. If we further walk through it, I can reassign the contract to my colleagues. I can indicate that a different user group or department needs to work with it. And I can add additional colleagues to this overview so that they will have this contract on their overview for their actions in connection with it. Then the e-signing status can be followed over here. And then there are those key data that are specific to this type of agreement. You can imagine that an NDA might need to be monitored, but an NDA doesn't necessarily have pricing aspects, and it doesn't necessarily have those aspects that are relevant for, in our case, services agreements. If you are sales side oriented contracts like a distribution agreement, an agency agreement, or a sales agreement, then you will have very different parameters on which you want to monitor your contracts than if you are on the procurement side. And this is what you can fully tailor to your own needs. And it's quite powerful. And what you do, and here is where the added value of a full integration between contract creation and CLM is visible. You would build your contract sheets for contract lifecycle management by using the Q&A questions that were triggered in creating a first draft of that agreement, because typically that will fit the variables that you have in your business, leads to a large part, and that you want to monitor or manage your contracts on. In addition to those business aspects and legal aspects such as assignability, change of control, applicable law and dispute resolution mechanism that you may want to record in connection with a signed contract, there are of course timing related parameters, metadata that relate to the effective date, expiry date, and the question whether you want to continue the relationship or not. Now, that is where notifications are to be sent out by Weagree, and this is quite a advanced way of how we have set it up. Weagree supports both the careful and the careless people in relation to the Weagree CLM. Careless in that Weagree allows the administrator to predefine certain parameters and therefore the notifications that are being sent in connection with certain dates. So the careless user who just registers the contract in the CLM and doesn't fine-tune on the parameters will get those notifications as they were predefined by the administrator. And it also supports the careful contract manager who doesn't necessarily need to be reminded of all aspects of a certain contract, because they may find that certain notifications are either irrelevant, require further consideration, other notifications may be necessary. Let's take the example over here in connection with the effective date. It may not only be important to take a first milestone action, but it may also be necessary to take first actions in connection to the contract at a low urgency. As it is so fresh, it's within a few weeks time from now, there may not be a need to create a task, but I would want to have this sort of scheduled 5 days as of the effective date. In connection with the latest date for termination, 150 days before by default is scheduled for receiving a notification, but I may want to be a little bit earlier than that in reconsidering alternatives, so I would send myself an action just like that. And I think that the default notification that I would receive is not relevant for my purposes. Same may apply for the 95 days in advance, because then it may be too late, or I might want to leave it in in case we are going to terminate it, and I allow myself just a little bit more time, being 95 days, presuming that the termination notice period is 3 months. And that is all. There's an overview with all the tasks in connection with this contract. If there are more than just 1 or 2 pending, that this may be a useful contract-related Kanban. And you have the possibility to check the history of modifications. There's some logging on all the changes that have been made in the past and who has made which changes to the CLM. All users' actions are recorded and logged into the Weagree wizard. So there's a full audit trail of all the actions in connection with the contract at all stages. But not everything will be visible over here because not all of it is relevant for immediate insight, but it is available on the background. Final thing is that next to each item in the CLM contract fields are these little green eyes. That is if you had the automated AI supported review of contracts activated, because in such case you would click on the little eye and it will jump straight to the contract clause where that parameter is actually addressed. Now, we have not done that. It's the subject of a separate video. Same relates to automated and AI-based risk assessment of contracts. We leave it by there and we go back to the overview page of the Weagree CLM, where you can manage your obligations and where you have access to the signed contracts that are, in this case, here on this page, under my responsibility as an owner, or in which I am involved as one of the stakeholders in the contract. You can see that there are a few with high urgency, and of course this is the contract entry that we have just moved into the CLM, so that's on top listed. It gives me good insight on what contracts are requiring my attention. I have made my notes so as to who is to act first. I made some notes to self on what action needs to be taken. And if I don't remember exactly what this contract was about, there's the info icon that tells me more about the background of this agreement. Then in this column, you can see those documents that are immediately available. Strange enough, it's an Excel sheet. Let's see why that is the case. There's also a red icon in this case instead of a blue one. And that is because the final version signed by all the parties has not yet been uploaded in connection with this contract. And if I click on it, I have immediate access to the full repository of this signed contract entry with those in the archive if I wish. I also see why the Excel sheet is on top. That's because Weagree treats the final version as their first ones to be listed, then annexes and schedules to be the second or the secondary ones, and the draft contracts to be thirdly visible. In this case, we have kicked off version 5 for signing, so I would change the status into the pre-final version, and once the e-signed version returns, of course, it will be added on top of this. That will certainly be a PDF. Okay, so this is now my repository. If you refresh the page, you can see that it's actually the Word document that is currently available. And I have, just like on the pre-contractual page, the possibility to filter it with some shortcut buttons, so to say. For example, I can see with one click of the button which contracts are expiring in the next 2 months. Let's walk furthermore through the overview of the contracts and tell you a little bit more about what you can do over here. If I would like to assign a task in connection with a certain contract, for example here, Annemarie van Fluiten, in connection with check for a kickoff meeting, I select it over here and I can assign her a task and she will receive the task on her Kanban. I can change the stakeholders of this contract in the case of a handover. So post-signing, it makes a lot of sense that you organize a handover to the people of the operations who need to work with it. And I could, in connection with a selected set of contract, change, for example, the status of those contracts, where I might find that they are not for high priority or medium priority only. And I could indicate, for example, for a select set of contract entries in the CLM that they are to be terminated or that they are actually terminated. Likewise, I have on the overview page possibilities to change a number of things. And for example, if I know more information about pending contract, I could also change the date, and it opens up the pop-up what we've just seen in connection with this contract entry a few minutes ago, and I could change the date, or I could even change the notifications in connection with this contract entry. Now, this is what is readily available if you are on your My Signed Contracts overview page. There's, like elsewhere in the Weagree wizard, a page of My Colleagues, and in this case it basically means that these are the managed contracts or the CLM contracts in my user groups. I have created some filters to see what is Matti van der Poel working on, Marianne Fox, and with one click of a button I can see how they are doing, and I can step in if some urgent action was required, for example in connection with this distributorship, if a colleague in the business approaches Marianne and she's not in the office today. I can also see whether there are any contracts expiring in the next 2 months. Actually, my colleagues are doing way better than I do, because I do have expiring contracts. Now, as a step up to the last part of this demo video, I'm going to create a widget that is going to be shown eventually on the analysis and reporting dashboard of Weagree. Very appealing part of the demonstration, but what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to create a button like these over here, and I'm going to show you how that button sort of automatically converts into a widget that you will then be able to show on the analysis or reporting dashboard and equally on the My Wizard dashboard. What am I going to do then? First of all, I'm going to filter the overview over here for contracts with the status high priority or medium priority. That basically means only the urgent ones and the medium ones are to be filtered out. I might as well add some further filtering for organizational units or business units if you wish. I might also further filter this down to certain user groups like procurement, legal department or sales department or the likes, but I'm going to limit myself to the general urgent and medium tasks as I have them over here. Now I fold in the overview of what we have right now. These are clearly all the high and medium priority tasks, and I'm going to save this as a button. As you can see, next to the button is a buttonize button, and it allows me to define, first of all, the color of the button that I would like to show, and I make it red. Here we are, high and medium contracts, and it filters out only those contracts of high and medium priority. Now, we're now entering the last part, and quite an appealing part of the walkthrough demonstration, where we go to the analysis reporting dashboard. As you see, there are quite a number of widgets. They report or allow for reporting on various aspects of the business. First of all, what you see is the countries where we do business. It indicates that there are 29 contracts that we have pending in France. There are some 19 in Germany and some 155 in the Netherlands. Procurement-oriented contracts are 2 of them with 2 suppliers in France and 4 of them in Germany. I also have a clickable overview of contracts that we have signed over the past few months. And for example, here are 2 agency agreements. And if I want to know what these agreements are, I can simply click on it and it moves me to an overview or reporting page where these 2 contracts are actually shown, and I can dig into it and find out what those contracts were about. Let's go back to the dashboard. Then what you see is overview of the average value of distributorships, the average contract value. You can see the pending business transactions currently, and you can also see which contracts are under the responsibility of Bernard H., Jacques, or Marianne Fox, and I can see what she is doing or where she is running short of time. And of course, what you see over here is the one that we've just seen, the distribution agreement for the Netherlands, where there may be action required for Marianne. Then I also here on this dashboard have a view of the pending e-signing transactions. So I have an overview of the entire user groups, of which I am a member, of course. You can see how many contracts have been e-signed over the past few months. You can see whether there are any pending or rejected contracts. There is none. Everything is well managed in that respect. Also, measurement widgets are on the dashboard. For example, what is the average time of the e-signing? So it may give some gamification, some sport to bring this number down. Similar number, what is the average time to approval of any submitted contract that is subject to approval. And then finally you have those widgets that allow you to monitor the usage of Weagree and see how many of the users have been logged in. You can fine-tune this for individual users or user groups so that you can see who with which user profile, who in which user groups or which user groups, and who individually have been using Weagree, and change the date range on which reporting is being made. You can also monitor the licenses available of the Weagree wizard in a widget, and altogether, as you see, this dashboards give you a very powerful overview of the business ran through Weagree. You could also make contract portfolio analysis. You can analyze what are the first draft Q&A answers given. So in case we as a business are sending out the contracts, we can analyze how we send out under which parameters we send out those contracts in order to fine-tune or optimize the direction in which people do their proposals to the counterparties. Now, one final step before ending the demo walkthrough video is I wanted to put the widget that we have just created on this dashboard. And then we find the high and medium priority action contracts over here, and I can simply drag it onto the dashboard, and you will see that these are all the high and medium priority contracts. Configuring these widgets may look and feel difficult, but the reality is that it is extremely easy. Every widget has a gear and you just click on it and it allows you to configure the settings for this particular widget, and it will be adjusted according to these settings. You can fine-tune or zoom in on user groups, as you can see, on contract types for contract sheets for CLM purposes. You may fine-tune on a date range, and if you set a certain date range, then it will walk along over time with so that it is updated 2 months from now for the then last 7 or 12 months or whatever your date range may have been. Save the changes and it updates the widget just like that. Now, this concludes more or less the walkthrough demo. You might be quite as inspired and enthusiastic about the Weagree wizard as we are, but even if not, you will hopefully have seen how powerful Weagree can support you in all your contracting work. You might not like the look and feel of the portal as it is, but let me give you one final remark that together with the customer, we have made it possible for you to adjust the look and feel of the Weagree portal entirely to your own organizational's house style. That should support your change management efforts to the maximum extent. Now, it's time to reap your benefits. Contact us for more information because there's much more that Weagree has to offer, and we are happy to answer your questions. Also, In this video, we have not addressed all the main features and we have not addressed all use cases. This was just a mainstream walkthrough of the core functionalities. If you integrate Weagree with SharePoint or with your own document management system or DMS, you will see that use of Weagree will be a phenomenal shell over your document management system or managing all your contracts from within one central place. We will address that in a separate video, and that's quite adding something. We have quite advanced approval workflows to offer, quite powerful, but we'll address it in a separate video. There's AI automated contract review, there's AI-driven automated risk assessment, and of course there's quite substantial entity management, as I had already mentioned it halfway this walkthrough video. All those topics are addressed in separate walkthrough videos. And then of course there are quite major use cases for the Weagree wizard, contexts or situations in which Weagree will be particularly powerful. Think of managing an entire M&A transaction with not only the share purchase agreement, but with all the documentation that relates to an M&A transaction. Or similar to an LMA credit facility financing transaction where dozens or hundreds of documents are collected, and you can manage all that and create all this from within one project within Weagree. We addressed that in a separate video. And finally, there's a use case for construction agreements or construction projects. Also, those type of projects may generate hundreds of documents which are all linked together. And also those projects are addressed in a separate video. Now, thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact me. We are very happy to answer any of them. Thanks a lot.